for
Thank you
having
for
me.
joining us. How are you
Yeah,
doing
and
today?
by the way, I love the previous segment about the local PUC, DC.
Mm,
It matches up and syncs up with a lot of our goals. And the other thing I think what that he was saying was that everything's happening at the local level. We couldn't agree more. So great segment.
awesome. Thank you. We're glad you enjoyed it. And we love to have guests that sort of connect with their different
Connect with
missions
their
and
different
projects. So, I mean, by all means, why don't we jump in? Tell us a little bit about what you all are focusing on with earthday.org, and then how does your role fit into that specifically with your own passion?
So every couple of years we have new themes. So this year, our Power Our Planet kind of spoke to the big issues of our time: is where we get our power, and whether we have the power to change things, not just in terms of energy, but in terms of the environment generally. So it's kind of a um double entendre, if you will. Our Power Our Planet is really about um, it's going to save the planet if we move to renewable energy, but it's also that we have the power to change it. And I think a lot of us are feeling a little bit less hopeful than we normally are. Everybody in our business are pretty much optimists, but times are tough. So, our Power Our Planet is really about educating not just the US general public about renewable energy, and also globally, because we're in 192 countries now with Earth Day. But additionally, the big deal is that we collectively have the power to force governments to adopt um, renewable energy and environmental protection if we just work together.
Excellent. And I'm glad you made that point because I know that the Earth Day Org Network has been, involved in a lot of environmental policies that have passed in the past. So if you could, share a little bit about what some of those accomplishments were, and then with what you were just saying, what are some of the ones that you want to tackle amid this current Trump administration?
So, jumping back for 2 seconds to the history of Earth Day, it started in 1970. So, this is our 55th anniversary. So,
Mhm.
50 years, but 55th anniversary of that. And back then, you had industrial development had kind of trashed the joint, if you will, and we had rivers on fire and birth defects and lead in our, not just the pipes, but in the water, and uh, tailpipe emissions were awful. It was kind of an extraordinary time of a kind of reckoning with what happened when industrial development started in the 1800s, and the culmination of that by 1970. It was pretty profoundly bad. Then the movement itself kind of capitalized on both the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement, because there was a huge amount of unrest. You certainly weren't there. I was too young, and but my from what I understand, and still talking to Dennis Hayes, the person who organized the first Earth Day, who's our emeritus chair of our board, it was supposed to be a teach-in on campuses, but it jumped to being a national event with 20 million people, which was about 11, 12% of the population. It freaked everyone out in Congress and the president, who was Nixon at the time. And so they rapidly moved to create all the laws that we now enjoy. Rolling them back is a really bad idea, whether it's from an environmental justice perspective or if it's a climate perspective, which impacts all of us around the world, in some countries much worse than here. But the long and short of it is Earth Day's history and where we're going is all about solving the world's biggest environmental problems, educating people, mobilizing them, and above all, diversifying our movement in terms of our demographics, in terms of people's opinions. So we try to work, we're the big tent. It's not always fun to be in that big tent with people who think radically different than you do on certain subjects. But our goal is really to make sure that everybody has a healthy, safe life, good jobs, and that we, keep up momentum for environmental protection in the face of the onslaught of negative national governments and corporate investments and making sure we're not successful.
And in terms of that, so I mean, is it a lot of when you see the challenges that you all see at the organization when it comes to pushing your environmental message every year? What are some of those challenges? What do they look like? Is it mostly at the corporate federal support level, or how has it been navigating that within as president?
Well, money in politics doesn't help because we're outspent, 10,000 to 1. For every dollar the nonprofit world has, industry has an extraordinary amount. And I call it sort of corporate interference in political outcomes, because they dump so much cash into political candidates who will then carry their message. And so, and I understand we're living with a Supreme Court decision that nobody in their right mind, I think, would have thought was going to happen, which is that corporations are people, so they can put a lot of money into elections. But what happens is we're forced to be really creative, very strategic, targeted in what we want to get done. So even though people want us to be everywhere all at once, the reality is, even though there are many environmental groups, we don't have the money to fight every single battle at the national level. So Earth Day in particular believes in local action. We believe in building grassroots movements. We believe in working with the most disadvantaged communities, the most disenfranchised, the most marginalized, and the most polluted communities. And so our goal is to build what I call environmental political power, which also, by the way, has to do with jobs. It has to do with trees. I mean, in poor communities, most people commute to their subway or to their job in unlined with trees, streets and roads. It makes life so much more difficult. So we really focus on working with people to make them understand what the definition of the word environment means, which is, if you look it up, what surrounds you. And if what surrounds you is not great, then we want to work with those people to get the political power that they need to make it change.
Absolutely. And I want to dive, into specifics. With our paper that, like Ms. Denise said, just came out yesterday, you were featured in it on behalf of an Earth Day story that the Informer did. And one thing that you spoke about, for those of you all, page 22 in our April 24th edition. But either way, one of the things that you talked about that I found very interesting was the discussion of microplastics, and especially how the effects it has on children, with even just where they sleep, to drinking from plastic bottles, which is for anybody that drinks a plastic bottle. So can you talk a little bit more about that conversation, and what are some of those dangers, especially as it pertains to youth, that people may not be aware that you are focusing on?
Well, the science is getting almost to the point where it's extraordinarily dramatic. It's worse than the evolution of the tobacco and cancer connection. What we're seeing is plastics was introduced. The first one was in early 1900s, but it really took off in the 70s, 80s, 90s. So your plastic load in your body, Jada, is probably double what mine is, because you've been exposed to plastic for a much longer period than I have been. But what we're seeing is studies that show that people who have heart attacks that have microplastics in the plaque, which gives them the heart attack to begin with, they're the ones who die, because your body cannot get rid of plastic. It can't be eliminated like other toxins. It just stays in there and accumulates. They're finding it accumulating in your lungs, in your brain, in your arteries, in the placentas, and brand new babies are full of plastics. A brand new study came out on babies and how much plastic is in their brain, and it was stunning. In addition, people don't understand that plastic, which is oil, is made up of sometimes dozens of chemicals to get the kind of plastic that you need. So it's not just the oil that's going into your body, which itself, there's no such thing as virgin oil or virgin plastics made out of oil, because you need chemicals. None of those chemicals, give or take a couple, but hundreds of them, are not regulated or tested by EPA. They have no idea, if you combine these 6 chemicals to make this product and it ends up in your body, what the impact's going to be. It's incredibly difficult to do it, but they're not even trying. So my biggest concern is, in addition, plastics takes a minimum of 1,000 years to break down. And when it breaks down little by little, as the sun hits it, or as that plastic tube goes in your arm when they take your blood test or whatever they're doing, it heats it up, it melts it down, so you have more and more plastic going through your system. And so the biggest problem I see is we don't understand the connection between the chemicals, the plastic, and what we can do to stop it, because we all know plastic is a useful product. But I also see plastic companies and oils companies absolutely committed to turning those stranded assets, which they'll have, meaning all the oil, that's their assets, will be stuck if we move to renewables. So if you ask any of them where they're going, it's plastics. That's the future of Shell, Exxon. It's in plastics. And right now, we really need to figure out how to move completely away from oil-based to chemical-based products that we use every day and come up with something else. One of the most idiotic things I've seen recently is we just made huge inroads in our national parks and our cities to get rid of plastic straws. They're really bad. They kill animals. They're bad for our kids. We're putting them in our mouths, which are hot, and we're sucking into microplastics because then people are slightly inconvenienced, myself included, by a lousy paper straw. But the reality is they were getting better and stronger and more useful. It's just the oil companies paying people off that makes people sign executive orders to say, we want to bring back plastics. It's one big system of political donations and paybacks and legislation that undermines common sense. Not, I don't care how rich you are, how poor you are. We're all invaded by plastics. None of us are safe. And so I think this is eventually going to be, it's already a major topic, but I think people are going to start really understanding the dangers of plastic and that you can't, there are opportunities to move forward. You can make a lot of money finding a new product that gets rid of these things. Then we're going to have to deal with, 100 years of plastic production that has left all of our bodies and the Antarctic and the Arctic all completely full of plastics. And I hate to be negative, but I think it is as big a problem as climate change, and we need to deal with it and not allow our political leaders and our corporate leaders and other people who don't want to be inconvenienced to just sign off on taking steps backward to replace it with materials that are better and healthier for us, animals, our kids, you name it. So that's, our plastics program is really focused on getting information. And nobody likes change, right? I don't want to have to throw out everything that's plastic in my house. And but I have done it. I've invested back in glass and silicone and other things that work actually really much better, don't break down, aren't all cruddy after you wash them in the washing machine. So it's a switch, but we used to use glass. We used to use aluminum, which is much better. So we can go back to those things without really suffering the kind of health impacts that we're seeing with plastics.
Absolutely. And, for my last question, kind of a bit of a two-part to touch on a few things that you mentioned, just in the sense of, microplastics is as big of a conversation as climate change. So what are some of, different sectors of, the fight for environmental justice or sustainability that you think is overlooked or not, or overshadowed by others? And do you think it's sort of a domino effect approach and sort of, to get to a really truly safer, healthier planet? Is it tackling one at a time? Is it a little bit of everything in one? How do you see that kind of working out?
First of all, there has to be an agreement. And let's just focus on the US, because the rest of the world, honestly, if you go to other countries, you can't believe how polluted they are compared to the US. But why do we still have an area of the United States called Cancer Alley, which is largely low income, primarily African American, full of chemical plants that they know are giving extraordinarily high rates of cancer to children, adolescents, adults? Why do we still have a place in the United States called Cancer Alley? And what's it going to take to make sure that everybody in the United States that has the right to, theoretically anyway, free speech, freedom of movement, freedom of, to educate ourselves, why don't we have a freedom from pollution? And I don't understand that at all, why we would turn away from those communities right when we're starting to get things done and say that's not important anymore, that it somehow, can be put on the back burner. And it's not just Cancer Alley. You go to poor communities in Appalachia or wherever you're moving around this country, and you see the same thing. Sites that are completely contaminated and polluted, and they're in a long line to get federal or state funding to clean them up. And they're not getting it. They're not getting it fast enough. So the long story short is, I think we need to put a very broad definition of environmental justice at the forefront of our movement, because it's just, besides not being fair, in my view, it's against all the principles that we are supposed to live for and believe in the United States, that we're all entitled to an equal opportunity. And we aren't if we grow up in places that are really bad. My husband did. He grew up in a place with oil fields in his backyard. They all had to leave because it was seeping out. People all over the country are experiencing this. It's just not okay, in my view. And I hate anybody stepping back from that principle that the environmental community has largely adopted and is focused on. So, and we're a big, much more diverse movement than when I started at Earth Day and started in the environmental community, which is probably the best thing that's happened in terms of my own personal success, is watching the diversity of people that are working on it, running the community, litigating the issues, raising the money in the communities. It's a very different landscape than it was 25 years ago.
Okay.
And that is probably the positive note I'd really like to leave on, because it's without that diversity, without us all working together, we're just not going to solve the problems.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kathleen. And thank you for leaving on that positive note. I encourage all of our viewers to please go read more of not just Kathleen's, but other environmental leaders' thoughts in both our Earth Day supplement, Our Power, Our Planet, which came out last week, and of course, in the article that features Kathleen that just came out in our weekly edition yesterday. So thank you for being here with us, Kathleen. Thank you for everything that
Thanks, Jada. I love your program. It's really good.
Awesome. We appreciate. Thank you. Please feel free to come back anytime. We'd love to keep
anytime. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Where do you come to get